Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me. I'm Flora, speaking out as usual. I'm remembering, yes, this is a real memory. Back 85 years ago, it was 1941, January 6th, oddly enough, that President Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and the nation and gave his State of the Union speech, January 6, 1941. And it electrified the nation. I remember that speech. I was 13 and a half. It was called the Speech of the Four Freedoms. He was facing, we all were, a world in total upheaval, more than the world had ever been before. I don't know quite how to describe to people of this generation what the world was like in 1941. The Nazis had invaded and conquered most of Western Europe, nearly all the nations there. Great Britain stood alone against that force. Stalin, the Russian communist dictator, dominated most of Eastern Europe and even parts of Asia. Mussolini in Italy had already made his notorious fame by conquering Ethiopia, Albania, Libya in North Africa, and now was allied with Hitler. The fascist dictator Franco had taken over Spain, over one of the most horrific civil wars in history. The Hirohito government of Japan was already lord of China, most of China, and was already planning, though most of us didn't know it yet, to control the Pacific nations. In other words, the world was almost totally dominated by powerful, dictatorial, authoritarian, brutal forces. And Roosevelt knew this. He knew that we were on the brink. He knew that we would inevitably need to join this war. And in fact did, a year, 11 months later, when Pearl Harbor was invaded. He had stood on the brink back in 1933 when he first became president. There the nation was in very great danger, the Great Depression. We were in terrible danger. There was no federal help anywhere for the starving, the homeless, the unemployed, the sick. We were in very real danger then of falling prey to communist forces as perhaps the only answer to the financial disaster we were facing. He then had talked about overcoming fear. The only thing you have to fear is fear itself. And he brought with his, well, how shall I put it, this joyful power of his, this genuine love for the nation, this genuine concern for the poor and the sick, fighting the conservatives in Congress every step of the way, who when he started the Social Security, first time the nation had ever done such a thing, so old people wouldn't be helpless, abandoned, starving on streets. He started the Civilian Conservation Corps, in which the government actually employed the unemployment to do important building works in the nation. The conservatives in Congress accused him of, quote unquote, fouling his own nest because he had been born in the adored only son of a mother, a widow, of an elite, powerful, wealthy, conservative family. And over the years, he had slowly come into awareness of the desperate need of so many people in the country, and he genuinely cared. He was a flawed man in many ways, but he cared. He tried to bring the country together to fill them with confidence and hope as they faced the disaster happening to the world. Their nation on a brink. The four freedoms, he said, were to be the basis of this nation as it moved forward, and he was hoping the basis of the world when someday the dictators were downed and people's voices were heard again. The four freedoms: freedom of speech and expression. That included the arts, of course, and teaching. The 1930s was quite a time of oppression of speech and what you taught in the schools. Freedom of religion. That was very much needed. The Great Klan was still extraordinarily powerful and persecuted Jews and Catholics and anyone they felt was strange or different in any way. Freedom from want was the third. He cared about people's hunger, people's illnesses, people's helplessness. And then finally, freedom from fear. That was a big, big theme of his, was all along, for he knew people driven by fear can become dangerous people making dangerous decisions. Elections of despots usually happen when a population is afraid. Vision. We're on a brink now, very different from any crisis we've had before. This is not a crisis of an outside invader. This is the first time in our history that our own executive branch of the government, the executive administration, is in so many words an open enmity against any different political party, all individuals, all states, all cities who criticize, who resist, using sometimes brute force, sometimes lawsuits, sometimes inappropriate, to put it mildly, firings of people. You speak up, for example, as a legislator, senator, telling the military personnel you have a right to disobey unlawful, unconstitutional orders. You dare to do that, and we will bring you before the courts. We will accuse you of treason. Our president will say you are traitors, deserving death. How dare you speak that, even if it's legal and constitutional? It's not our agenda. All right, you have a city that protests against the methods of the ICE, masked brutal force. You protest, all right. We will send 3,000 of them to flood your city, to break open doors in your homes, to thrust people down, face down in the snow, to haul them screaming from their cars. We will send these masked brutes to stop citizens on the street and demand to see their papers, which is not their constitutional right to demand. You will make people afraid to go to school, to go shopping, to go to work, even to walk on their streets of residential areas. Freedom from fear. What would President Roosevelt have thought seeing the city of Minneapolis right now? Freedom from fear. Okay, freedom from want. What we will do is reduce Medicaid benefits, SNAP benefits. We will make it almost impossible for people to afford health insurance. We will, as of this week, take away $2 billion from federal grants for mental health. Freedom from want. We don't care how hungry you get anymore. That's your problem. A president who says in the middle of all this, and I quote, the only thing that can stop me is my own mind. Some people have wondered, is this the end of our democracy? People are seriously asking that. And I was thinking of a quotation from the great Churchill, who inspired Great Britain to stand out against the fascists and the Nazis when most of the world was under their control, and we had not yet come into the war. Churchill himself, who had been born of an elite, wealthy family. I love what he said. This is not the end, not even the beginning of the end. It is perhaps, though, the end of the beginning. The end of the beginning. In other words, our brink, our crisis now, is an amazing new test of our vision, our courage. I've heard it said, probably you have too, that after the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Hirohito government of Japan, one of the main naval commanders said, perhaps all we've done is awakened a sleeping giant. He had himself as a youth studied in America. He knew something of the American nature when it is awakened. Maybe all we have done is wakened a sleeping giant. And maybe that's what this brutal federal government is doing right now, waking the sleeping giant within us, the renewed vision of what America has stood for right from the beginning and stands for forever. Thank you, my fellow giants, for being with me today. See you next week.